What's that mean?
Let me get Kitty there.
She's looking at the birds.
What you see, Kitty? Well, Max seems to be doing real well. It's nice to see him today.
Yeah.
There's Kitty coming for...
I wish Mark had come out with him.
Yeah, well...
He said that Beth was coming in and he had to clean the house. I don't know when she was coming in.
Yeah. Is are Carol and Clem going to come in this
I don't think so.
season?
No. They don't travel as much anymore.
Yeah.
And he went up there for Christmas. So.
Yeah, we don't have much genealogy on the Conley side.
No. We should have done it, but
Your parents didn't have many records or family
I
trees?
really believe that it was, I think that my mother must have been pregnant, and that was such a guilt trip on her that she probably lived her whole life in fear that we would find out.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the way it was then, especially if someone is 30 years old.
Yeah.
You know, which is a shame, you know, when you think of it. But
It's
so
silly.
she would avoid any talk of family. They really avoided it.
She got married when she was 30 and your dad was 30.
Hmm.
And you said they met...
Well, I'm assuming that they met when she worked downtown.
Yeah.
You know.
What, her maiden name was Falls.
Hmm.
And your dad had some relatives that were wealthy, is that right?
Well, actually, his family always had money because they always had a butler. You know, so I don't know what his father did though, and I know that his mother was bedridden for years. But by the time I was really old enough to know them, they were both gone, and it was just like Aunt Gert who ran the galleries in Horns, which was a very exclusive woman's shop, and she would make trips to Paris twice a year to buy clothes, but she also had this affair with Richard King Mellon, and he would meet her in Paris twice a year.
Wow.
And it was supposed to be a well-kept secret because he was married, but when he died, he left her a lot of money. And I can remember that she was very upset because then everyone knew, because he put her in the will. But she made good money running the shop. In fact, when she retired from there, she opened a shop in Palm Beach.
Wow.
And so for a while she had that. And then one of her sisters, Aunt Al, worked for her. You know, she was the buyer and like the owner, and Aunt Al worked there.
Was your dad close to his sisters?
No, because I think they disowned him when he married my mother. And it had to be because she was pregnant. It couldn't have just been because she was poor, I don't think. Because she was Irish, she was Catholic, you know, so the only thing they could have had, they would have felt, you know, in those days you felt that the girl trapped him if she got pregnant, you know.
Was your mother from a poor family?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yes, and my mother only went to the 6th grade, you know, in school, although she was very smart. And my father, I believe, was in medical school. They wanted him to be a doctor. And, of course, he had a drinking problem, so he never would have been a doctor anyhow, I don't think.
What was his chronology? Was he a veteran?
Yeah, he was in the Navy in the First World War.
Okay.
But I don't think for a long time. You know, I know he was in the Navy.
Is that how you got the idea to go to the Navy? Did he encourage you on that?
No, really, I just got it on my own. I read books about sailing vessels, and it fascinated me. And so my first idea was, well, I'm going to be captain of a sailing vessel, a whaling vessel from New England, you know. And then gradually I found out, well, they don't have women captains, and then they don't even have the ships anymore. So the Navy I fixated on. And plus, during the war they had this comic book, Wonder Woman, and she was in the Navy. And so I used to read that. You
Yeah.
could see her, she would be in the Navy working at the Pentagon in her uniform. And then when she was Wonder Woman, she would take the uniform off and be, so that's probably what did it.
What, were you recruited in high school? Did somebody tell you that you could?
No, I had it in my mind. I
Yeah.
knew. In fact, the day I was 18, I went downtown to join. And I didn't know that you had to be 20. So I was really disappointed. And then the other services, like the Air Force, you could go in at 18. And Nikki went in at 18, but and she tried to talk me into it. And I said, no, I'm waiting for the Navy. So I waited until I was 20.
Yeah.
Went in the Navy. Never regretted it. I loved it.
What did your parents say when you told them you were going to do that?
Well, my father, I think, was thrilled. And my mother, I don't know. Because she had 2 nieces. One was in the Marine Corps and one was in the Coast Guard during the war. So, and they were, that made it okay. That was Dorothy and her sister. So it was not a bad thing.
Yeah.
The Korean War had started and, and they didn't have money for college.
No, but were they frightened for you? Because I would think some parents might have a reaction of fear,
I don't think so. But,
What about your siblings' reactions to when you said you were going to go in?
I can't remember a big reaction.
You guys seem very independent, the Conley kids.
Yeah, we
Is that
were.
true? Were
Yeah.
you close-knit?
Well, not really.
You all seem sort of to have an independent spirit.
Yeah. Because my parents never interfered with what we did. The only thing is, if I can remember my father saying, when I first got a job and I wanted to pay something, no, he said, because if you start paying rent, then you're going to think you can live your own life. As long as you're living under my roof, you obey my rules, which weren't hard,
Yeah.
And so never had to pay anything. And
Was your dad a strict father or a real lenient guy?
very lenient, yeah. And my mother, well, they both were. They weren't disciplinarians.
What was a typical weekend or Sunday at your place? What happened in the Conley household?
Well, it would depend on whether my father was there, whether
Yeah.
he was drinking or not. Because you never knew when he would take off and, be gone for a week or so. Usually on payday. So that left all the bills for my mother.
And how did she handle them?
Not very well. She would just sit. I don't know how she did it, we moved a lot because you didn't pay the rent.
Yeah.
You had to move. And I don't know how she did it, or how she put up with it.
Because she didn't have family money to fall back on or
No.
to help.
Nothing, no. Mm-mm.
Did she work?
She did, yeah. She worked at a bakery, I remember, in Anthon's in East Liberty. That's the only place I remember her working. So, and she never would take welfare or anything like that. I don't even know if they had it in those days.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't have taken it anyhow.
She was a proud woman.
Yeah, You just didn't do that.
Yeah.
But, we didn't eat very well. We didn't have clothes.
How would she confront, if at all, your father when he would come back or?
Well, she would stop talking to him. And once I remember her getting mad, just once. And she picked up a knife.
Yeah. Were you guys aware of that, or did she try to do what she could to keep you insulated from whatever your dad was doing in those days?
Well, we were aware. But as kids, it didn't bother you.
Yeah.
You had your own life. And everyone was poor.
I hear the train rolling through Oakmont.
Yeah.
It's a nice sound.
Sometimes. There's one guy that comes through and he really blasts it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, you grew up, did you start in Homewood or were you in Point Breeze?
No, we lived in Wilmington, Delaware. Well, actually, I was born in Ithaca. And then I think we lived in Wilmington, Delaware, but we lived with my mother's sister. So, he was there, but I guess, and her father lived there too. So that's, I guess, probably didn't contribute much money. And then we moved to Pittsburgh, and we moved in with relatives when we got here.
Well, before you get to Pittsburgh, what brought the family to Ithaca in the first place?
Oh, he worked for Ward Baking Company, and they transferred him up there.
What was your dad's profession?
He was a truck driver.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's all he ever wanted to be. I heard him say that. He never wanted to be anything but a truck driver. So for Ward Baking Company, then he started working for the Sun-Telegraph.
Newspaper.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Is that in Wilmington?
No, that was here in Pittsburgh.
Okay. What brought you from Ithaca to Wilmington, Delaware?
I don't know. Probably that we had to move to Wilmington. That's where my mother's sister lived, and that's where her mother was. And her mother's sister worked, and her mother was bedridden.
Yeah.
So probably she came to take care of her mother, but brought all of us with her. And I don't even remember my father being there at the time, so he might have stayed in Ithaca.
Now the newspaper, he drove a truck for the newspaper, right?
Yeah, and then from then on it was the newspaper.
Yeah.
And the press, the Sun-Telegraph, and then the press. Yeah.
And where did you live in Pittsburgh?
Oh my God. First we moved in with the relatives, which was in Homewood on Bennett Street, where the YMCA is now, the new YMCA. And we started into Holy Rosary. We always went to Holy Rosary then, so we were all within that district, And we lived at various times on Homewood Avenue in an apartment, and on Kelly Street, and on Hermitage Street, and on Hamilton Avenue, twice on Hamilton Avenue in different apartments. And then when the apartment burned down that we lived in, we had to split up. And so my mother, and I guess my father and Pat, who was just young, went to live with some relatives on Kelly Street. And I went to Aunt Mary's, and Sally went with me. I think Carol went with us too. That her husband was in the Army, and so she had this house, and that was my father's sister. She took the three of us in. We lived there for about a year.
Aunt Mary had a more stable household, I guess?
Oh yeah, all of his family did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where was that?
It was actually off of Center Avenue. You know where the Giant Eagle is on Center Avenue?
Yeah, sure.
Right across from that, there's two, it's like they used to call it, not a duplex, but there's row houses. There's
Yep.
two, yeah, well, they lived in the last row house.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was, at that time, really nice place.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then his sisters all lived together in a much bigger house up on Center Avenue, up near the VA hospital. A huge big house.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we went with Aunt Mary instead of to the big house, but we did. And then it was during the war, and there was no houses to get. When the house burned down, it wasn't like you could go and find another house. And then we finally did find a house up on Hermitage Street to rent, and we lived there for a couple of years, and then it was sold. And so we had to move with other relatives. And that's about when Sally went to Hart House.
Yeah.
Yeah, by that time I was in high school. And Carol lived with a friend of hers, with her family. We always stayed in the same school district, though, so we always went to the same school, which helped. Some continuity.
Yeah. Well, that must have been tough, bouncing around, huh? Or did it make you resilient?
It did. You never questioned it.
Yeah.
You did become independent.
Yes. And so after you graduated from high school, let's see, what high school was it? Holy Rosary?
Well, Holy Rosary closed the year before my senior year. Carol graduated, but then it closed. Like they announced it wasn't going to open about a week before, and so the other Catholic school was already filled, and so Jean had contacts with a school in Westview, and she got us all in there, Evelyn and me and Jean and I think Franny Doherty. But that was a drag because we'd go from Homewood downtown, transfer, and go over to Westview.
Oh boy,
You know.
Yeah, what a commute, huh?
Yeah.
So you did that for your senior year?
Well, no. Half the time we would not make it past downtown, so they threw us out. So then we went to St. John's in Bloomfield, and they threw us out of there. And then Franny and someone else, Nikki I think it was, and I went to Westinghouse. No, I didn't go to Westinghouse then. But anyhow, some of them went to Westinghouse. I just quit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Evelyn just quit too.
Yeah, you said.
Yeah.
Now you weren't bad kids, were you?
No.
They just kept throwing you out.
Yeah, well, yeah, because they were very resentful. Here we come in our senior year, and we had always been like competitors.
Yeah.
You know, and they certainly didn't welcome us with open arms, so they picked on us, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even in Westinghouse. I did go to Westinghouse, yeah, for a while, a couple weeks. And, but that didn't last.
And so you had to bide your time a little bit between that time and you started in the Navy. Did you work in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I did work.
Where?
I worked at Rollier's Brothers Plumbing Supplies as a clerk. And I worked at the Bell Telephone,
Hmm.
which was really strange. I got into the Bell Telephone without a high school diploma because that was the big job to get.
Yeah.
You know, the Bell Telephone. And I worked there until I went into the Navy.
And let's see, you would enlist and you got on the train. Where did you have to go to do your basic training?
Great Lakes.
In what part? Is that Chicago, Illinois?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And was it summer or winter at that time?
Well, it was winter. Actually, it was like April, but in Chicago it was winter. Oh, it was cold there.
I'll bet.
You know, the wind off the water. Yeah, it was really cold.
And what is basic training? You know, what do you do?
It was 9 weeks, and a lot of it is issuing the uniform, learning how to march, and you had to march to 3 meals a day, and then they taught you a lot of things like the names of different ships and naval history.
Yeah.
And just basic things, and the different names that the Navy used for like the head.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. And you had to learn to swim. If you didn't already know, you had to pass the swimming exam. And it was 9 weeks. But you really learned. You learned how to march.
Were you with all women?
Yeah.
And do you remember approximately how many women were?
Well, you see the picture. That was my company.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many it was.
So 10 weeks, did you say?
9.
9 weeks, and then where did you go to?
And then I went to school at Telemann School in Norfolk, Virginia, which was, I think that was about 6 months. And
That's where they taught you to be a radio operator?
yeah, well, I was at
Radio
Telemann, which is, You didn't actually have to learn Morse code, but you learned all the, like a teletype machine and encryption and decryption, sending the messages and all. And when I graduated from there, I went to the Naval Air Station at Norfolk for duty.
Yeah.
And then at one point they sent me over to the Naval Supply Depot for duty, but I was only there for about 3 months when my orders came through for London. So I went to London.
Telephone.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Hello? Hi. She said she had just called for reservations for somewhere,
Yeah.
and she said the only thing she could get was 4 or 9:45.
Oh my.
I wasn't going to make 4.
Yeah.
9:45 is good. I'll get a nap and
New Year's Eve.
yeah. If we went at 4 and then she wanted to come back here and wait till midnight, well, I would never make it.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's probably makes sense.
Yeah.
I think we left off. You were in Norfolk. You went through radio school.
Telemann School.
Telemann
Yeah.
School.
Mhm. And then I went to London for 2 years. It was always 2 years you
Yeah.
went for. And
Would you in London? You mentioned you were doing some encryption
yeah.
work.
Yeah, well, I was a lower rating, so mainly I was like a messenger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on the admiral's staff, and and he had like officers that worked for him, and I would just deliver the messages as they came in to each of them, and they'd sign for them.
Yeah. What was it like living in London in the 1950s? I bet it was interesting.
Yeah, it was, because they hated us.
Why?
They did not like Americans because it was too close to when the war, and they had this saying that the Yanks were overpaid, oversexed, and over here. They didn't like it. So we wore civilian clothes. Because they had been through a really rough time,
Yeah.
you know, the English. And the American sailors especially were very arrogant because we made good money compared to what they made, you know. And we had an exchange, and we could get cigarettes like for 10 cents a pack, and they couldn't even buy cigarettes most of the time. They didn't have milk, and they didn't have, you know, we had all of that. And we always had the best seats at the theater, and
Did you see the bombed out sections of London still?
oh yeah, yeah. And in Germany too.
Yeah.
Visited over there.
So what kind of things would you do for fun on your holiday weekends when you were in London? I guess you had the run of Europe, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. And they encouraged you to travel. You know, they would tell you there's a flight going to Germany. Do you want to go? And they would be, you know, you can have the day off to go. They really encouraged you to travel. But we had our own clubs, and we had a liquor store just for Americans. No wonder they hated us, you know.
Yeah.
And the embassy was there. We could eat at the embassy. You could have steak, you know, for real inexpensive.
Were you operating within NATO, or did that predate NATO?
Predated it,
Yeah.
I think. I didn't know about NATO. Might have been just starting up, maybe, NATO.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked for, it was called Camistus Elm area. And what they did was they shipped, like anyone, or supplies that were going from Europe to the States or anywhere, they were responsible for shipping it.
Yeah.
And they had 2 liners, like the Queen Elizabeth and another one, that they would send people back and forth on. And
Is that how you went over?
no, I flew over. And then coming back, when it was time to come back, I made a mistake. I didn't realize that I had to ask permission of one of the officers that I worked for. And I just put in a request to go back on the Queen Mary, and that made this officer really mad, and he sent me home on a troop ship.
Oh.
And I was the only one that didn't get homesick, and I had to take care of all these wives and kids that were throwing up, and ugh. And it was like in April, which is the worst time to travel, you know, and it went to New York, from London to from Southampton to New York. It was a miserable trip.
What is a troop ship like? That is like a cargo ship?
Yeah, it is like a cargo ship filled with troops. And the families, no niceties. Everyone else went home on the Queen Mary. You know, and here I worked for them, and I had to go home on a troop ship. But I really didn't care. You know, I didn't know the difference.
Yeah.
Actually.
What was the next port of call after London?
Let's see, where did I go? I went to London to Boston, and I was there for 2 years. And
Where
then
did you live in Boston?
I lived on Newbury Street.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't as it is now. It was all, it wasn't commercial at all. There was one dress shop that opened while I was there, across the street and down a little bit, like in someone's basement. But they were Victorian houses, and they were divided into apartments, and we had like the second floor of one of these. I think it's now, last time I was there I checked, and I think it's a hat shop now.
Trendy area even then, though, wasn't it?
No, you didn't really think of things like trends. No, it wasn't. It was a college town, you know, Harvard there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a subway right up at the corner that took us, you know, right to where we worked. I worked in the Fargo building, it was called, and down at the docks, actually. And
What'd you do while you were in Boston?
communications.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, they didn't have air conditioning, and it was the hottest summer I think they've ever had in Boston. You know, and they had a rule for civilians that if the temperature and the humidity reached a certain point, they didn't have to go to work. Well, for days at a time, it would reach that point. So none of the civilians had to work. So the Navy had to do not only their own job, but everyone else's in these buildings without air conditioning. It was horrible.
You don't think of Boston as a real heat wave type of place, but I guess it must have been uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was, because
Yeah.
there was no air conditioning. No, but I think the Fargo building is probably still there, but I'm sure it's not Navy headquarters. It was the headquarters of the Naval District.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you like living in Boston?
I liked Boston. I always liked people from Boston. Anyone I'd met in the Navy from Boston, I liked. So I knew I was going to like it.
Yeah. Did you take excursions to New England and
Yeah.
Cape May, or Hyannisport,
Hyannisport, yeah.
the Rhode Island?
Yeah. Your mother and Dad came up once before they were married, and we took a trip up to Newport. I should have the picture here somewhere with the sailor sitting. It's got to be here somewhere. A picture of us sitting below that, but we took that trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Newport's a nice town, huh?
Yeah.
Cape Cod is what I was thinking of earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened after Boston? Where'd you head
After
to?
Boston, I came back to Pittsburgh for recruiting duty, and I was here for 2 years. And then I guess I went to Hawaii after that
Yeah.
for 2 years, and San Diego for school. That was about 18 months, and then 2 years duty, and then Washington, D.C.
Well, back up to Pittsburgh. If you came back to Pittsburgh, did you stay with your parents, or
Yeah.
did you get your? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I went to recruiter school first, which was in Bainbridge. You know.
In Massachusetts,
No, in Bainbridge, Maryland.
Maryland. Okay.
Yeah, to recruiting school,
Yeah.
and then came to Pittsburgh. Yeah.
And what did you have to do as a Pittsburgh-based recruiter? Were you downtown at the Federal Building?
I was downtown at the old post office building,
Uh-huh.
which is where Kaufman's Garage is now. That was the old post office building. All the recruiters were in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had to go to, you visited all the high schools during the school year and gave talks. And, I had a certain recruiting area and I had to visit. And then I had to handle them, like when the girls would come in, give them the test and go with them when they got their physical, and, and send them off at the train station to boot camp.
Did you select Pittsburgh or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I asked
okay.
for it, yeah.
Yeah.
Both times. Yeah.
And so then from Pittsburgh, what was next?
Hawaii.
Hawaii.
Yeah. What was it next? No, I think after Pittsburgh, they decided, they disestablished Telemann. They decided they weren't going to have Telemann anymore. And you had to become either a yeoman or a radioman. And they just decided for you.